Hey everybody, tonight's video is called The Showing of Treasures, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Isaiah, where we're going to be looking at Hezekiah showing his treasures. And so we're going to be in a very short chapter tonight, where it's only 8 verses. It's not the shortest chapter of Isaiah, but it's one of the shortest chapters. So we're going to try to push through this in a good manner of time, because the next several videos are probably going to be on the long side. So Isaiah chapter 39 verse 1 says, "At that time Merodach-Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, sent letters and a present to Hezekiah, for he heard that he had been sick and had recovered." So the first 3 words in verse 1 we see is "at that time." And it speaks of after Hezekiah's illness, but before the events that are recounted in chapters 36 and 37. And we might think the king of Babylon, oh, what a nice, kind gesture of kindness that comes from the king of Babylon. He's showing concern to Hezekiah as a fellow royalty. But it's more than just the king of Babylon showing courtesy. He attempts to bring the kingdom of Judah onto the side of the Babylonians so that they can go up against the Assyrians. And the first 38 chapters we went through in Isaiah dealt with the present threat from the Assyrian Empire. And the rest of Isaiah, chapters 40 through the rest, prophetically speak to the threat of the coming Babylonian exile, Babylonian Empire. In today's chapter, it's kind of given us an introduction to the remainder of the book through chapters 40 and through 66. And in verse 2 it says, "And Hezekiah was pleased with them, and showed them the house of his treasures, the silver and gold, the spices and precious ointment, and all his armory. All that was found among his treasures, there was nothing in his house or in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them." So the text doesn't really tell us here if Hezekiah is pleased because of flattery or of some desire for help against the increase in Assyrian threat that's parallel back in 2 Kings 20 verse 13. And doubtless to try and impress his visitors in 2 Chronicles 32 verse 25, Hezekiah showed all he could contribute in an alliance against the Assyrians. And the coming rebuke from the prophet Isaiah would demonstrate that this was nothing more than proud foolishness on King Hezekiah's part. And he's in a place that's a dangerous wanting to please and impress men, especially ungodly men. And we see Hezekiah, he received the recognition from the king of Babylon wrongly, and he gets prideful about it. He gets selfish. He lets it go to his head. And he wanting to please men, for us, wanting to please men makes us weak servants of God. In verse 3 and 4 it says, "Then Isaiah the prophet went to the king Hezekiah and said to him, 'What did these men say, and from where did they come to you?' So Hezekiah said, 'They came to me from a far country, from Babylon.' And he said, 'What have they seen in your house?' So Hezekiah answered, 'They have seen all that is in my house. There is nothing among my treasures that I have not shown them.'" So God's spokesperson showed up without being invited to confront the king, as often happened in the Bible in Isaiah 7:3 as an example, 1 Kings 13:1, 1 Kings 18 verse 16, 17, and 2 Kings chapter 12 verse 1. And Hezekiah, he answers evasively, avoiding the question about the envoys said, and instead he focuses on the fact that they came from a far country, a phrase that elsewhere describes people coming from a distance to see the Lord's works of judgment or deliverance in 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 41-42. In his action, he's displaying that he's trusting in man rather than trusting in the Lord. He's trusting in political alliance with Babylon, not trusting in the Lord. And I believe Isaiah's questions were intended to point to Hezekiah so that he would see the error of himself. But unfortunately, he's so self-centered that he's not going to see the error. And Hezekiah's pride and inflated ego made him blind. In verse 5 through 7 it says, Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts, and behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So we see Isaiah predicted the Babylonian captivity that would come about a century later in 586 BC, which is another prophetic historic event fulfilled in all its expected detail. And some people, theologians and skeptics, they will argue that Isaiah the prophet is not the one who gave this prophecy about the Babylonian captivity. They say some other guy named Isaiah did, but I believe it's Isaiah the prophet, and it took place 100 years or so after the fact. And here the word phrase introduces the prophetic charge and judgment. And we see Hezekiah's sin, a flash in his wealth before the visitors backfired, though his sin was only symptomatic of the ultimate reason for the captivity. And the major cause of the corrupt leadership of Manasseh, the major cause was the corrupt leadership of the king Manasseh, which we find out in 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 11 through 15, that King Manasseh was Hezekiah's son. So while Hezekiah feared the Assyrians, they weren't the real enemy. The real enemy that they should have been, not enemy, but the one that they should have been fearful of is the Lord himself. The Lord should have been the one that they were fearing, not men. And in verse 7, the sons who will descend from you, we know Hezekiah was without a hair, but he will someday have sons, aka Manasseh and so forth. But they must go through captivity as seen in 2 Kings 24, verse 12 through 16. 2 Chronicles 33, verse 11, and Daniel chapter 1, verse 3 through 6 shows the prophecy's fulfillment, that King Nebuchadnezzar took all of Judah's wealth away. And the true riches that were taken, the most valuable, were the sons. And Daniel and his companions are just an example of those who were taken into captivity. In verse 8, to finish the chapter, says, So Hezekiah said to Isaiah, The word of the Lord which you have spoken is good. For he said, At least there will be peace and truth in my days. So a surprising response to the negative prophecy in verses 5 through 7, and perhaps acknowledge Isaiah as God's faithful messenger. And Hezekiah perhaps acted selfishly, or he looked for a bright spotlight to lighten the gloomy fate of his descendants. And we see Hezekiah at the ending of his time, he shows little concern for his own people or descendants. And though the Babylonian exile does finally end, the prophetic word is clear that there is no peace for the wicked, which we also find later in Isaiah chapter 48, verse 22, and Isaiah 57, verse 21. But we see in Isaiah 66, verse 12 and 13, that God's peace will extend to the children of Zion. And I'm going to bad talk Hezekiah a little bit more. What a pathetic state of heart in a king showing response with relief of God's coming judgment, that, it's not a big deal because it's not going to happen in his lifetime. That's self-centeredness. And so we see Hezekiah, he started out as a godly king, but 2 Kings 18 verse 3 through 7 shows us the outstanding godliness of King Hezekiah. Yet his beginning was better than his end. We see that he didn't finish well. And he went through the sickness. He got his life extended 15 years, but it did not make him a better or more godly man. And Hezekiah didn't make good use of the extra time that the Lord had given him. And so to wrap up today's video, so like I said, we want to try to keep this short today, because you're going to be upset with me with the next, several chapters probably. Tonight we look at King Hezekiah showing his selfish side as when he received the letter from the Babylonian king. And second verse showed us Hezekiah entertaining the envoys of the king of Babylon. And may we bear in mind ourselves, let's have a personal challenge here to not fall into getting puffed up when we receive compliments or recognition. It doesn't matter if the CEO comes to your job site and acknowledges you. You should not be taking pride in that so serious where you feel like you're better than everyone else, because you're falling into pride. Now I want to look at Galatians chapter 1 verse 10, where it says here, for do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. So these are the Apostle Paul's words here. So on the other hand, when we live focusing on pleasing men, we cannot say we're serving and pleasing God at the same time. And when we seek to please men, we are really living to serve ourselves. It is a prideful thing to do, because what we're doing is we're taking value from the men when they give us praise, honor, and recognition that they might give us. And I'm not saying it's wrong to serve people. It's glorious to live, to have a servant's heart, to do good things for people, but don't live to please them. Do not back off of God's word, even if it goes counterculture. In verse 3 and 4, we see Isaiah question Hezekiah regarding the visit of the Babylonian envoys. And verses 5 through 7 showed us the word of the Lord to Hezekiah through the prophet Isaiah. And we see the chapter ends with Hezekiah's response. And one thing I want to end, I made a thing of here, I want to end saying time or age does not necessarily make us better. I know some people say, people get wiser when they get older. That's not always true. Time does nothing but guarantees passing away. Time is just passing right by. And we often hear the phrases, and you probably use them yourself, that time will tell or time will heal. But time will do nothing of the sort. And time will only come and go. That's how we use time, is what matters. And I want to go over Ephesians chapter 5, verse 16 to finish the chapter, to finish the video today. So bear with me. Ephesians always gets mixed up with all the smaller books in the Bible, so I gotta flip the pages right. So Ephesians 5:16 says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. And I like the ESV, which says, make use of the time because the days are evil. You see, our time here is short, and we have to give account for what we do with our time. And we'll see in Nexus, we'll look at the comfort and strength for God's people, and that will be announced when that will take place. I don't know the schedule yet, but I'll let you know with the daily announcement before it's uploaded. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless.